Hello. So I went through a couple of months ago, I went through a few methods of working with Vital as an FM synth and different things you could do with FM and just giving different ideas on how to use it and different ways that you can mess with it and stuff like that. And a lot of people seemed to get a lot out of that. So I thought I'd do the same for subtractive synthesis because I think a lot of the time people underestimate the amount of avenues you have even with simple waves like a saw wave or a square wave to change the sound over time and make it sound cool. And of course this is transferable to more complicated stuff, like if you're working with FM or if you're working with crazy wavetables and stuff. So it's kind of good to know, I guess, the ways that you can change the sound. So what this is going to be is I'm just going to talk through a couple of different ways with filtering, with pitch, with little modulations and stuff like that, with basic subtractive synthesis, the sort of options that we have to change up the sound. So the first and most, so this isn't really going to assume a whole lot of knowledge, it's just going to assume you have an idea of what an envelope is, an LFO is, you have an idea of what a filter is. I'll be explaining that a bit, but the first thing we're going to focus on is volume. So obviously volume is the simplest thing. You can change the sound over time. So by default here in Vital, you're going to have pretty much a gate signal set up where it's going to be on when you're hitting the note and off when you're not hitting the note. We can change that up a bit. For instance, we can delay the note here, so then it's not going to happen right when I hit the key. So I'm hitting the key now, and it takes a second to come on. And we can have attack, which is going to sort of slope up the volume over time. So we're going to start at 0 and we're going to move up. Then we've got hold. I'll come back to this later because this kind of has to do with decay. So decay is basically the amount of time it takes for us to return to, so if we've got our sustain here, sustain is just the level it's going to hold at while we hold the key. So we can set whatever level we want. Let's just, for example, set it to 0. So it's going to go from 0 to a point and then return to 0. The decay is going to control the amount of time that takes. So the longer the decay, the longer that slope downwards is going to be. We can also set our sustain to sort of a higher level. It doesn't have to go to 0. This hold parameter here is going to introduce a bit of time where we hold at maximum before we enter into this decay section here. So we're going to go to the top and then we're going to hold here for a bit, however long I've said here would hold, and then we're going to enter that decay where we start to move down to the final volume that we've set here with the sustain. And then the release, what this is going to do is it's going to say wherever we are here volume wise in this decay, if I release the key, it's going to slowly release from that volume to 0. So if we're at, say we hold the key until the end of the decay phase here, so let me get rid of this hold and let me just bring the sustain up to halfway here, and we'll get the decay here sort of at a moderate level. So if I'm at the sustain level here, so you can see now I've approached the sustain, so it's going to hold here until I release the key. Now when I release the key, it's going to slowly release instead of just immediately releasing. And if I'm at 0 here, obviously, let me just pull that down. If I'm at 0 here, obviously the release is going to have no effect. So that might be a bit basic for some people who understand envelopes and stuff like that, but just so everybody's kind of up to speed on what it does. So even with this, we can kind of get the bare bones of some sounds. For instance, let me just bring up the pitch here and let's bring down the release. So if we've got a long attack and let's hold the sustain somewhere here, and then we add a long release too, we're already sort of a lot of the way towards a pad sound. So you can see it already sounds sort of paddy. There's some other stuff we might want to do to make it sound more nice. But that's the basic volume profile of a pad. Then, you know, we could create a pluck by, say, let's bring down this attack here. And let's bring down the sustain. And let's create a really short decay here and get rid of this release. So now the length of the decay is basically how plucky it is. We can also create sort of different profiles within this. So let's say we have a slightly shorter attack. A slightly longer decay. A lot of future bass uses kind of chords that do this kind of a quick or slowish attack, quick decay sort of sound. Obviously you need a bit more unison and stuff like that to make that sound sort of right. So basically you can create any sort of profile that you want with the envelope here. So let's just set that back to pretty much its regular value here. And it's important that you understand what an envelope does before we move on to the rest of the stuff, because a lot of it is going to be sort of a variation on what we're achieving here with volume. So with volume you can do quite a lot, and you shouldn't discount volume just because you're doing something else. So an awful lot of the time if somebody's got a filter going on, they might not worry about what the volume envelope is, because the filter envelope is sort of changing the volume over time. But an awful lot of the time combining the two, having a filter envelope that's, you know, quite loose and then a sort of snappy volume envelope at the start, can really change up the characteristic of the sound. So I'm going to show you an example of that now. So let's just, I've got some chords here and I'm going to put an arpeggiator on them just so the chords sort of play in a sequence. So I'm just going to have these chords play in straight eighth notes. So let me turn that down a little. It's probably going to get pretty loud. So now we're just playing straight eighth chords. So if let's just not worry about volume for right now, and let's take this second envelope here and let's attach this to the cutoff of the filter. Let's pull the resonance down. And let's create a pluck with this filter now. So now we've got a plucky sound that's happening with the filter. And in a way it's sort of controlling the volume as well, right? Because as the filter goes down, the volume is changing. So let's add a bit of unison to that just to make it a little bit nicer. But the other thing that we can do is, we still don't want to discount this volume envelope because we can add a lot of character here. So let's say we take the sustain level and we bring it down here. And let's add a really, really short decay. Now let's bring this sustain level up. And let's sort of make this a little bit gentler. So now we've got sort of a separate attack that we can control here, so we can add much more of a snap to the start with the volume combined with the filter. And let's say we wanted to take that concept a bit further of sort of enhancing this sound that we've got here. So right now we've got this kind of snappy pluck sound and we're using the volume and the filter to create that sound. Now we could also bring in envelope 3 here, and let's also mess around with the idea of messing with the pitch. So let's do a similar concept here where we create a really short envelope, and let's attach this to the pitch here. So now we've almost got a transient at the front of this. And the nice thing is, that might be a bit extreme, so let's just ease that off a bit. Let's ease off the pitch a bit as well. So now we've got a transient at the front. And now our pluck is much pluckier, and it doesn't matter where our cutoff is. So we can be really low down here, where normally it wouldn't be that plucky, and we're still getting the pluckiness from our volume and our pitch envelope. And even as we go up and there isn't much filter movement, we still have that pluckiness in there from the pitch and the amp envelope. So if I were to turn those modulations off now, let's hear the difference. So let's pull up the decay on this, and let's just turn this pitch envelope off. So now you can see a lot of that pluckiness is gone. And as we come up, first of all, it's got less attack in general, but pretty much as we come up to the end of the pluck here, there's almost no filter movement, so our sort of pluck idea is gone. And maybe we want to brighten it, but we still want to keep that transient effect. So the point of this is saying basically you don't want to discount things like volume and pitch as part of sounds, because they can enhance it a lot even though they're very simple. So speaking of pitch, let's have a look at what we can do with pitch in a subtractive context. So we'll take the filter out of the equation for now, and let's just initialize this patch so all of my envelopes are back to normal. So a few things we can do with pitch. I already sort of talked about this concept of using pitch to create attacks. So let's just sort of do that by itself here. Let's leave the volume envelope alone. We'll go for envelope 2 here, and let's attach this to the pitch. So we can create a nice short attack here at the front. And let me just turn off the arpeggiator here. So we can create an attack at the front of the note here with our pitch envelope. And that can be sort of as pitchy or as transient as we like. The other thing we could do is we could reverse this modulation, and we could come up in pitch. This tends to sound good on a lot of dance leads, so let's add some unison to this. And let's add a compressor and some distortion. Let's actually take that compressor off and add some reverb and a delay. Let's tone that down a bit. So let's increase the intensity of that. Let's decrease that delay a lot, actually. So a lot of sort of heavier dance leads and stuff will use this concept of pitching the start of the note in a certain way, and maybe also combining that with something like a filter here. And let's drive that filter. So you can see there's an extra character being added by the fact that we're messing with the pitch and the filter at the same time. Let's change up the envelope on the filter here. Let's go up an octave. Let's remove the pitch envelope. So it just sounds like that without it, and then we'll add it in. So another thing that we can do with pitch, as well as you know, using it to create transients, or, you know, pitching up at the start of the note, or even pitching down at the end of the note with something like a pitch bend or something like that, is we can use it to add vibrato to sounds. So in Vital, how we would do that is we'll just attach an LFO here to the fine tune here, and we can make that bipolar. You can either hold control when you're dragging it over, that'll make it bipolar, or you can come in here to the matrix and you can hit this bipolar button and then it will go both directions. So right now we've got a really slow vibrato. Generally when vibrato is played on instruments, it is brought in over time. So if you click here on this smooth parameter, you can bring in a fade in. So we won't have it at the start of the note. And then it'll come in over time. The intensity of the vibrato, like how fast or slow it is going to have a massive difference on how it feels. So you can have a really frantic, fast vibrato. Let's bring down that fade in time. So that's going to sound really less musical and more sort of rough and aggressive. Of course, you can bring this up into the audio rate range. And let's actually use it on the pitch as well so we can get a greater amount. And this gives us that sort of rough hardstyle lead sound. And what frequency is at is going to make a big difference as well. So generally, if it's really, really high frequency, it's just going to add a bit of dirt. And then if you're kind of in the lower audio rate frequencies, it's going to sound really aggressive. But just back to regular vibrato again, if we go to say tempo here, and let's bring it down to an eighth. And let's cool that off a bit. Let's go back to the fine tune here and make sure that's bipolar in our matrix. So we can just fade that in and that's going to sound like a regular lead. You may even want to bring this in with your mod wheel, but for now we're just going to use the fade in. So this is adding a lot of dynamics to what is basically just a saw wave. But that's not the only thing you can use it for. You can use it obviously for vibrato, and you can use it for things like what I showed you with the hardstyle lead, where you add a bit of aggression. But another thing that you can use it for that's quite useful is to create a sort of analog drift. So if we bring the speed way down here, let's bring it down to happening over 2 bars. And let's attach this to the fine tune here. I'm going to hold control, and that's going to let me make it bipolar. So now we've got a really slow glide over time. Let's bring it down. Let's bring down the fade in as well. We don't need that anymore. So we can have it be sort of obvious like that, or really subtle. You don't really notice that much, but it's adding a bit of randomness to the sound. It can be particularly good on basses. And this really kind of shines when you bring in a second oscillator, because now we're going to be moving this oscillator against the other oscillator. And we get sort of a more analog sound. This can sound really good for just basses and stuff, but it can also sound really good for chords. So let's take this out of mono here and add to 8 voices. So let's hear that on our chord progression here. Let's turn this into more of a pad using our volume here. And let's make sure both of these are sent to our filter. Let's bring that envelope down onto our filter as well. And let's use a different chord progression for this as well. So Let's not make this re-trigger. Let's just have this sync. So that'll mean that it just keeps running. So you can hear that just having the vibrato on this oscillator at a really slow speed kind of thickens it up in terms of pitch. We can still add unison on here. And it'll kind of morph over time as the pitch moves. Let's add some reverb and delay and stuff to that. So let's intensify that pitch drift now, just to see how different we can make it. So you can hear it's kind of subtly fading out of tune now. So you can really add a lot to more simple sounds just by varying the pitch over time, maybe varying the pitch between two different oscillators. And an awful lot of these digital synths like Serum or Vital and stuff like that, people's complaints that they don't really sound analog, a lot of that has to do with the fact that in these analog synths they kind of model them so that the phase is drifting subtly on the oscillators over time. The pitch is subtly drifting over time, and it's those kind of movements and unpredictable elements that kind of make it sound better. But you can replicate that. Even you could use a really slow random modulator here, so you could randomly alter the pitch over time. I just showed with the LFO here, just so we can have more control over it and we can see the effect that it's having. But you can recreate an awful lot of what makes analog more interesting yourself by just modulating even slight variations in volume. So let's say we had these oscillators at 2 different octaves, and let's actually switch this up to a square wave as well. So now we've got the square wave and the saw wave. Let's add an LFO here to the square wave, and let's change its level over time. So let's again just have it at a really slow rate here. And let's make sure that that is synced here. And if you've got a few different oscillators, so let's bring in another saw wave here. No, maybe let's bring in, let's bring in another square wave here. Let's send that to the filter as well. And let's put this one up 2 octaves. Yeah, 2 octaves. And let's attach another LFO at a slightly different speed to this one. Let's make this one a quarter note. And let's influence the volume of this over time as well. Maybe a bit slower than that. Let's have this one drift and pitch a bit as well. Probably a bit less than that. Let's not even have that much in the mix. So you can hear all we're using here is simple waves, and just taking the time to modulate the basic stuff without having to do anything fancy or anything fancy with effects. You can get a massive range of sounds just by modulating the simple stuff in a creative way and having them interact with each other. And that's what makes, I suppose, subtractive sounds more interesting. Of course, you can apply this to, FM synthesis, where you have multiple operators and they're all being modulated in slightly different subtle ways as well. And of course, this subtractive stuff still applies to all of the more complex synth stuff that you will be doing. So finally, let's just have a look at filtering and some of the stuff that we can do with that. So again, a lot of this stuff is just thinking outside of the box and stuff like that. So let's have a look at the basic low pass filter. So again, we can use a basic envelope. Let's take envelope 2 here, and we can control, not the key track, we can control this filter over time. So as we're playing our chords here, we can have this come in over time. So now we're changing the timbre over time. Maybe we want more of a pluck. massive difference is made when we emphasize the frequency here with the resonance as well. So we go from extremely zappy sounds, especially if we speed up this, to more calm. But definitely play around with the resonance, and don't be afraid also to modulate things like this. So let's modulate the resonance slowly over time. Let's make sure that that's synced again. And this is going to give a different feel, especially if we're in an odd sort of rhythm. So let's set this to, let's set it to dotted. So now our sound is changing over time. Let's maybe speed this up with an arpeggiator here. Let's have it just play notes. So now as our resonance changes, it's sort of changing the sound over time. Let's apply a similar concept here with the random modulator, and let's attach that to the cutoff. Let's make it more of a pluck. Let's bring in our volume envelope here. Keep it very plucky. Let's do that thing I was talking about earlier where we bring in a second oscillator. Let's send that through the filter too, and let's use a really slow LFO here again to modulate the pitch. Let's keep that synced here so it keeps running. Let's keep it subtle. Maybe make it a bit faster. So now we've got this pluck sound that's kind of transforming. Let's add some delay and reverb to that. So you can see this is much more interesting than just throwing a pluck on there and, you know, just having the same pluck sound happen each time. There's no resonance change, there's no filter frequency change over time, there's no pitch wobbling happening. And let's bring in another element here. So let's maybe add a second filter and send the first filter through it. And let's change this to a, let's change the filter type here to a digital, and let's bring in a, let's see, let's bring in a high pass maybe. Yeah, let's make this one a high pass. Great, and let's make that really resonant. And let's have that be modulated over time as well. Sync that, make it pretty slow. And let's also change up some of the effects that are happening here. So let's have a, let's impact the reverb here, the mix, and let's choose one of the presets that's in here and see if we can get something sequenced. That'll be fine, and let's slow that way down. Let's keep it a bit more subtle than that. The high pass filter's gone a bit too high. Let's also, let's actually attach this also to the resonance, so the resonance is changing over time. And let's also fix it to the delay here. Now, let's pull that down here a bit. Let's bring in some of that unison. So hopefully that was helpful in showing you how you can make simple sounds, simple subtractive sounds more interesting just by playing with some of the I suppose options that you have available with pitch and volume and filter and timbre over time. Even stuff just subtly modulating the way the effects are moving can make the really simple sounds like plucks, chords, pads, stuff like that sound a lot more interesting. A big thank you to all of my patrons who support me in doing these videos, and a thank you to you as well for watching it. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to learn more from me about things that I know a small bit about, but not that much. So yeah, that'll be it. Thank you very much. Hopefully this has been helpful to you.